Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 253rd New Social Environment. I am Nick Bennett, the Special Projects Editor here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Paul McCarthy and Dan Cameron. We're also thrilled to have the poet Cristine Brache here, who will read to close today's program. We'd like to thank our friends at Hauser & Wirth for supporting today's conversation. You can explore Paul's current exhibition on their site and through the links we'll post in this chat shortly. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation, the traditional owners of Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters on which we stand. We recognize white settler colonialism as a part of the continual legacies of white supremacy, which has many expressions, contemporary and otherwise. We honor the memory of those that have lost their lives and to those that are working to undo this legacy of violence and injustice and acknowledge Black Lives Matter. Please check the chat also for a living document of resources and actions. I'd like to briefly introduce today's hosting guest and then hand it right over to them. So Dan Cameron is a New York-based curator, art writer, and educator whose professional career began with the 1982 New Museum of Contemporary Art exhibition, Extended Sensibilities, the first museum effort in the US to examine gay and lesbian identity in art. He is also an editor-at-large here at the Brooklyn Rail. We'll also post a longer bio over in the chat for both. And to introduce today's special guest, widely considered to be one of the most influential and groundbreaking contemporary American artists, Paul McCarthy was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and has established a multifaceted artistic practice which seeks to break the limitations of painting by using unorthodox materials such as bodily fluids and food. He has become known for his visceral, often hauntingly humorous work in a variety of mediums, from performance, photography, film and video, to sculpture, drawing, and painting. Without further ado, I hand the mic over to you, Dan and Paul.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much, Nick. Welcome, everyone. I want to just thank the Brooklyn Rail. I want to thank Hauser & Wirth and give a shout out to Malvika, who's kind of manning the controls, and of course to Fong and everyone at the Brooklyn Rail. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. We're down on the Lower East Side, where we're sweltering today.
It's out here in the cold.
Where it's
real cold, but cold.
Well, I was hoping that today we could take a little bit of the format, having just seen your show, of kind of making some connections between where I first got to know your work and then sort of where you are now about 30 years later. I've been a fan really hearing about you in around 1990, 91, or 90. Around then from Mike Kelly, from our mutual friend, because I'd already been working with Mike on a couple of different shows. And I knew that there was a great buzz around your work, Paul. And I think we even met once at Mike's backyard, but it wasn't until I walked into MoCA in early 92, this is LA MoCA, and saw your work called The Garden, that I just feel like my life changed on that day. I had to take some time and recover from what I had seen. And then I think my very next instinct was to reach out and try to find a way that we could collaborate. But, having visited Hauser & Wirth, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, I was thinking, wow, there are some consistent through lines, some threads that are just fascinating to think about when considering your work. So maybe we could start with a couple of images from of the garden, the way it originally showed at MoCA. So this is how I remember it. You approach from one side and it looks like nothing's happening. It just seems to be a sort of a woodland scene set on a stage. And I think it isn't until you cross around and see it from a particular angle that you see these two figures. Now these are animatronics in a way, aren't they?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the guy standing up seems a little older, and the guy lying down seems younger. Are they a pair in your mind? Is there a relationship between the two?
yeah, I mean, it's an older man. I mean, in a way, I saw them as a kind of like executives out in the woods, and the older man is teaching the younger man, and a sort of lesson is going on. And the piece, I'll kind of give you a brief on the piece. I was interested in trying to make animatronic figures, and it kind of coming out of this idea, this thing about Disneyland and Disneyland as some kind of inspiration of sculpture, and the Abraham Lincoln, the mechanized Abraham Lincoln, the talking bears, all of this, and I was trying to move in that direction and trying to do it, but I had very little funds. There was no money, and so there's a crudeness to these characters, and so there was this interest in making these kinds of figures, and then there'd been an interest in trying to make a grove anyway for quite a long time, and a kind of forest scene. And then there was this thing that happened where I was watching TV, and it was about beliefs, and it was about a kind of fan base for the Chicago Cubs, as I recall, like that they were in Belize television. They were able to watch Chicago television, and there was this crazy thing of like this kind of, I guess a light bulb of some sort, of this kind of thing where America didn't look out, but the world was looking in on America. And America didn't, it was a kind of enclosure and self-congratulations of some sort. And so
or an island, in a way, an island.
Of some sort. So these characters were sort of like these executives, an older, and again, like this idea, and I think at that time I was making work about male conditioning, and the male, who I am as this male was being conditioned by another male, an older male. Like I was being taught how to be a male, a man, right? And it's kind of, so there is this thing of that the older man stands up and the younger man lays down. And the way that the viewer coming into the piece would like look in, and they didn't look out. These characters didn't look out, but the viewer looked in. And then it's kind of like you become looking in, you're a voyeur, because you kind of have to look through the trees, like, and watch, right? And then they were made really crudely, right? Like I could only cast the bottom part, the rubber part, and of course the rubber wasn't so good, and the mechanisms were in the ground in the trees, and it's surprisingly how long they ran. I mean, I think they were shown, like, I don't know, probably they ran almost a year without breaking down in various shows, but eventually the faces against the tree wore out, and I think the characters themselves, I've replaced them several times, and they just the face wears out, the fingers wear out, the crotch area wears out, the knees wear out, and I've kept them. They become the dead men, and so that's a kind of a brief on the piece. The trees we got the trees from the big trees were, the original ones came from, they were used in Bonanza, which
right.
Yeah, which seemed in and how, I'm not sure, but around the Ponderosa, around the ranch house. And the trees were made in the 30s. They were molded from redwood trees in California. So I got the trees, and then of course I tried to buy them and I couldn't buy them. And so we rented them and molded them. So the original ones were from the Bonanza set that we got. And then the second time the piece was shown, I rented them and molded all of them and recast them. And so they're a recast of the original trees in the around the Ponderosa, I guess. So, which again is this TV show of these men, right? Women come and go in the TV show, but it's a group of, the father and 3 sons. So there was a weird connection that just sort of occurred, right? Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
One of the things that it makes me think about seeing it from a contemporary perspective is, it reminds me of the sort of incel phenomenon cropping up with the sort of white supremacist terrorism that's happening right now.
Lost you.
And the idea of a sociopathic need to attack society very often find themselves unable to maintain intimate relationships with another person. So this idea of going to the forest, going to a grove and copulating with a tree or copulating with the ground.
Yeah.
Dan, your audio is cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, the audio cuts out. I think I got where he was going with it, but yeah, he's gone.
Well, Paul, maybe now would be a good moment, Malvika, if you want to show the video we have of this. Okay, sorry. I'll screen that. Just a moment while I pull this up. Oh no, we've got it. Okay, great.
Sorry, I disappeared there for a second. I mean, I'm also thinking about Mike's interest at this time in the uncanny. And, that Kelly would often characterize the uncanny as something where you cannot tell if something is alive or dead, where you don't know if it's has an organic life at all, or whether it's sort of coming from the realm of machine. And this piece triggers that sort of fear of the uncanny.
Yeah, and I think, with the uncanny and Mike and I, we, one of the pieces which I think you have an image of is Heidi. And
yeah, we can move on to that actually.
Yeah, Heidi, that's family tyranny.
Heidi's the next one, yep.
So with Heidi, Mike, what had happened is in the 70s, the late 70s, when I was doing performances, and somewhere around 78, 79, I actually got an NEA grant. And then also I was going to be part of an exchange program with an artist from France, and I would go to Europe and they would come here or something. And I proposed, I said that, they were going to give me a studio in Paris, and I said I would like to make a movie in the French Alps, and I'd like to make the story of Heidi in the French Alps. And I at that point I was moving towards, Disney was becoming these themes of Popeye and Heidi were coming up for me in the late 70s. And I wanted to make a film of Popeye and a film of Heidi. And it was this idea of kind of appropriating an existing script, just get it a script and remake it. And so I tried to, in the late 70s, remake Heidi. And then they really balked at the idea and wanted me just to come and, use the studio in Paris, and weren't interested in the idea of remaking Heidi. And so the thing didn't happen. And then years later, there was a show in Vienna that Mike and I were both part of. And I had proposed to the gallery that I make Heidi. And then Mike at that point was interested in Adolf Loos and in relationship to Vienna. And Adolf Loos and his connection also to the subject of ornamentation, and then it creeping into ornamentation and modernism, and then it creeping into fascism. And so and Mike and I had made this piece, Family Tyranny and Cultural Soup. We'd done some videos together, and we had talked about doing a collaboration. We thought, well, let's do a collaboration. And so we make this piece in which we make a little set, and half of the set is split down the middle. Half of the set is a kind of corny chalet, a little mountain hut. And the other half is a bedroom from a photograph of a bedroom that had been designed by Adolf Loos. And in the front of that side, we did the facade, or the front of the American Bar. So it's kind of a schizophrenic building of chalet or mountain hut on one side half, and the other half Adolf Loos and modernism. And then we made this video in the gallery with that hut. But during that entire time, when we were preparing all of this, and again, in a very kind of corny, crude way, I had quite a collection of images and from wax museums and Disneyland, of these kinds of figures, and they'd kind of come out of that period with the garden. So, and Mike was really interested in the same kinds of the same kind of representations, like us, in sculpture and in art, like Paul Tech and all of this, right? And so the subject, when we were making Heidi, of the uncanny came up, right? And there were three bulletin boards, or three boards. One was the images of the uncanny, one was images of mountain huts, and one was images of sort of modernist architecture, and they were three themes that came up during Heidi. And so the uncanny, and Mike had, at that point, begins to write about the uncanny, which I think really became a kind of real instrumental and influential and important sort of.
Well, he even curated an exhibition called The Uncanny as part of Hansbeck in Holland, which was an extraordinary exhibition. I know you were in it.
And a lot of that came from this Heidi thing, this sort of, and in, this image here of and this is this rubber ass, which is shitting a sausage. And we refer to it as our neighbor in the video, but that's the ass from the garden. So it's that mold to make that rubber figure came from the garden, And,
I wanted to, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So yeah, so there's a connection,
If we can go back one slide, I want to talk about your earliest collaboration with Mike, this in Family Tyranny. And one of the things that strikes me, and you mentioned this in our last conversation, is that, artists were appropriating. They were doing a lot of appropriating in the 80s. And a lot of that appropriation had to do with art. Sherry Levine famously, or Mike Bidlow, or people like that. Whereas you and Mike as well in LA were actually taking appropriation techniques and using them on Hollywood, using them on the idea of the Hollywood product or the Hollywood character. And this goes all the way back to the late 80s.
Well, Yeah.
I mean, Family Tyranny isn't a movie, but it's kind of like a TV show, right?
Yeah, but I mean, even when I was saying that, because I was living, in Echo Park during the 70s, and I spent a lot of time on, on Hollywood Boulevard, and but I'd come to LA. In the 60s, I'd been in San Francisco and Utah, and in both places, experimental film was part of the whole. What I was involved in was Super 8 and regular 8 and 16 millimeter, and Brackage and Bruce Conner and Yoko Ono and all of this, Warhol. And in 1970, I applied to go to USC I wanted to be in the film department. And I kind of had this idea that Easy Rider had come out, and independent films was becoming, there was money from Hollywood going into independent films at that moment. And because of the success, I guess, of Easy Rider, and also the whole European, Godard and Bergman were all part of the late 60s. And there was this, I kind of had this, fantasy of the next step is the techniques of Hollywood. And like, I wanted to go to film school and somehow find myself in the film world in another way. And I go to USC, and it's somewhere between a really good experience and a terrible one. I really realized that my ideas had nothing to do with the film school's ideas. I mean, it was all about script writing, and you couldn't touch the camera until they approved a script. And I was interested in video, and I was interested in structuralism, and it just didn't work out. But there was this kind of view of there was something here in LA, and I end up, collecting a lot of images on Hollywood Boulevard. There were all these stores where you could get all these photographs, and these press photographs from movies and stuff like that. And so in the early 70s, I'm pretty, connecting to Hollywood in some way and being fascinated with it, and also being fascinated with Hollywood Boulevard at that moment and what was going on there as a culture. And then when I make Sailors, Sailors Meet and all that, the image comes directly from images from film, right? Like from Hollywood or from underground or independent films. And then, so there's this interest not the interest in Disneyland at that time. I mean, I was fascinated with the Matterhorn as a sculpture at Disneyland. I thought, wow, crazy. They made a mountain. And I was interested in the figuration in Disneyland, the little bronze Donald Ducks and Mickey Mouses and all this, and the characters, the mascot characters running around and all that. So there was I hadn't really connected with pirates. I was interested in Pirates of the Caribbean, but I hadn't really got to it yet. But Disneyland, there was an interest, but more of an interest in the dirty side of Hollywood, right? And
especially this Hollywood Boulevard underside of it.
Yeah, Kenneth Anger and all of this, right? And so when towards the late 70s, and I'd been using all the masks that I was using at the time, I would buy on Hollywood Boulevard and at these kind of novelty stores. And in this, so in the late 70s, there's this idea really appropriating a script, like using a script. Like, why write a script? Just buy one. You could buy them, right? Like, and just use that as the structure for the film. Like, I don't need to write one. I just have this, and then just abstract it. In a sense, appropriating something, appropriating Hollywood, and then abstract it and take it into something else and see where it goes, right? And use the language of the script, but just take it somewhere else. So that's when this thing of Popeye and Heidi happens, is towards the end of, you know, there's a thing that happens to me where I do performances through from, you know, late 60s up to 81 or 82 and 83, I guess. And then I'm worn out. And that's the end of public performance for me, in a sense, at that point. And so that period between 78 and 83, this idea of somehow using a script and appropriating Hollywood is happening. And I'm becoming more aware of how I might, that Disney becomes more interesting from these animatronic characters. So I think the appropriation of Hollywood starts back for me in the early mid 70s, and the Disney thing starts in the late 70s, early 80s. And then, you know, a long time after that, people would say, oh, you know, California is really important to you. And I would go, no, I could make this anywhere, right? It's not, that statement wasn't true. Like, I really began to realize that being in California really did affect me. And I was really interested also in California, the artist of California. And the misunderstanding, there was a misunderstanding going on over the fetish finish guys and Larry Bell and all that. I always felt like, you know, there was the concreteness of Donald Judd, and there was this thing of what's real in California. And, you know, what is real? What's real? Like those images of that.
Paul Schimmel did Helter Skelter.
Pardon? Gone.
Well, I was just going to say, when Paul Schimmel put together The Uncanny, that was really a
Dan?
Yes.
You cut out there for just a moment. If you maybe want to repeat what you were saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Paul, that it sort of moved from, you know, looking at Hollywood as something beautiful and shiny, moving something closer to the Manson family and sort of seamy underbelly of Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you know, using, you know, what Paul was doing there with Helter Skelter and all that. I mean, he was, you know, it was I mean, to a degree, it was a promotional thing. I remember at the time thinking, wow, Paul, is that a good idea? You know, like, what's that about, right? Because in a way, I think, yes, there's the underbelly of California and the underbelly of LA, and there's something about, but it's more about, for me, it was about questioning, you know, these institutions of America, right? Disneyland and Hollywood, or it's about questioning that. You know, I mean, there was a whole thing of California artists questioning New York, questioning and making fun of New York, as well as New York making fun of California. That was going on. But there, for me, there was this thing of, you know, it starts creeping into my work pretty early on about questioning these institutions, you know, these, and seeing them as conditioners, you know. Yeah.
Paul, could you tell us what's happening here in the family tyranny image?
Well, you know, I had been given a grant to a small grant to make a video in a cable television studio in LA. And I had 3 days that I could use the studio and 2 days to edit or something, like a 5-day deal. And Mike and I knew each other, had talked, but had never done anything together. And I just called Mike one day and said, look, you want to be in a video? And he said, well, what should I do? Sure, I'll do it. And I just, you know, I didn't have an idea. And I just said, well, hey, what if I'm the dad and you're the son, and you're going to go to school? And at the time I was making these drawings of these sort of alpine characters, these sort of, and in a way, Bavarian father fascists, and in the Alps, sort of. And I'm dressed in lederhosen and a little alpine hat. And I make this 2-wall set. It's got a floor and 2 walls and a window. And Mike and I just improvised for a couple of days in this little set. And then I edited this video. There's 2, one's called Family Tyranny and the other one's called Cultural Soup. And the Cultural Soup, Mike's not in, he's in Family Tyranny. And there's still a lot of video. We shot a lot. And Mike, we'd always talked about going back and re-editing stuff, but we never did. But it's sort of the first thing we did in terms of collaboration, you know, was this video. And
well, I wanted to move ahead a little bit to talk about our first collaboration together, which was the Pinocchio Pipe Nose Household Dilemma in Madrid in 1994 for Cocido y Crudo, because I'd sought you out, but I'd never worked with you before. And then this was this was this rare kind of opportunity I had to just sort of start getting to know an artist by collaborating.
uh-huh.
How did this piece develop for you? Because it seems like it was done before the Reina Sofia or not.
Yeah, I had done it. I was at the time, you know, after Paul Schimmel's show, it changed LA to a degree. I mean, not that New York came knocking in LA, but Europe came to LA. The galleries of Europe came to LA, and a number of artists sort of began working in LA more. And I worked I started doing pieces. The first kind of gallery things that ever really happened for me were in Europe and not in New York, and a little bit in LA. But I'd been asked to maybe do a project in Nice with Air de Paris, a gallery in Paris and in Nice, and with Florence. And I think I could essentially do what I wanted. And there was a room, Villa Arson in Nice, and they gave me this big room to make what I wanted. And I made this Pinocchio. I was after Heidi, I did Pinocchio. And kind of with this idea that it's kind of weird, like a lot of the pieces I've made through the years have pairings. There's always like one piece happens and then the next one happens, and it's always in twos. And it's often interesting how the subject of male female keeps going through it in a kind of Adam and Eve sort of way. And in a way, Pinocchio being connected to Heidi, like that was a couple, a pair. And so I made Pinocchio, and it was a house. And then I'd made a piece before years ago called Skull with a Tail, and it was about minimalism and primarily Tony Smith's black dye. And that minimalism, it wasn't the essence of the cube itself, it was that when he made dye, it's a skin that encloses a void. And once he makes the piece, you can never enter that space again, like the interior of the cube. And I'd made this piece, the skull with the tail was a black cube, and then it had like a tail. I referred to it as a tail that came out, and the tail was shaped, it's like the 90 degree, like it comes out, goes this way, goes this way. So it's kind of like the leg of a swastika. In a sense, this the subject of the 90 degree in the cube and the man-made object of the cube, but also the tail, what it did is that you could look into it, but you actually couldn't see into the space. It blocked the vision to the space. You knew that that tail was telling you there's a void in there, but you couldn't enter it. And the Pinocchio house was essentially that. It's a cube as a kind of house structure with a tail going off. The difference is the house is not standing correct. It's tipped onto its side. So the house vertical becomes the horizontal. And you can kind of see it in this image, the house, and then you can kind of see the tail going off to the side. And so the videotape, yeah, there's the tail. And when the videotape was shown, the monitors are placed on the tail. So it was a piece in a way related to minimalism, related to Heidi, and kind of, you know, the nose being the phallic, you know, the phallic nose. And then this, I shoot it in this building. The house could be flipped. We shoot it flipped right side up, flipped on its side, flipped back. I'm in the tunnel, all this kind of stuff. And we shoot for several days, and then the piece is completed, and it's shown a few times. And that's, so it was made in Villars-Arson and eventually makes itself to a couple of shows, you know, but.
And this drama that goes on between the two Pinocchios, the one that's alive and the one that's not alive, it gets a little, again, it steps into this sort of unnerving psychological territory where it's almost like, killing one's doppelganger or trying to erase one's doppelganger.
Yeah. Well, the connection between the puppet, like it's a puppet of himself, right? And that had come up in the 70s. I had made a piece. I'd made several pieces. Well, one thing that happened all through the 70s, there's this thing of wanting to perform with others, right? And I don't. They're almost all myself. I did one with Karen, but for the most part, it's just me, like the individual, which was all part of that period of time within performance art too, was the singular person, right? But I'd started using stuffed toys, stuffed bears, stuffed lions, and so they became the other. The other became the doll, or the doll meaning this inanimate toy of some sort. And sometimes it would go right to an object, like an inanimate, like not just the representation, like a toy stuffed bear, but would go right to an object fan. And I would assign characters to it, like the pan or the telephone might be my uncle, right? And so there was this switching not only this uncanny object, this thing, the doll, but also an object itself becoming a character, right? And so that had been going on in the 70s. And then in Heidi, there's a part in Heidi where I'm wearing a mask and I put the same mask on my hand and have a conversation, like a kind of conversation. So this thing of the double and the double of myself and as the character had been, it kind of had a lineage and, finds itself in Pinocchio and then finds itself, it starts up again in other pieces. But, and it was also this thing of fabrication, like I had fabricated that, a rubber mask. I was trying to move into rubber sculptures too, and rubber being closer to flesh than bronze or wood or plaster, like this interest in the material of rubber as sculpture. Because in the 70s, the early 80s, when I kind of quit this live performance thing, I go back to drawing a lot more, and I start trying to make sculpture, like as figuration, as statue, like a tchotchke statue of some sort, and the appropriation of tchotchkes, like small little figurines that were made in a mass way, taking them and abstracting them. It's another form of appropriation, right?
Well, we're looking now at Bossy Burger, which I feel like is a kind of a turning point in your work. It certainly seems to have radically reshaped what people in New York were feeling about your work, because it kind of, I don't know, there were followers of your work before then, but this seems to have come out of nowhere. And I just remember everyone being absolutely shocked by Bossy Burger and its explicitness, its almost goriness. And then, of course, the humor and the sort of bad taste or tastelessness that's part of it as well.
Yeah. Well, I made Family Tyranny and Cultural Soup with Mike. That had happened in 87 or something. And I had made the mechanized piece, what was it? Bavarian Kick. And there was a couple of years in there where I was thinking about things, and I wanted to make, I had got asked to do a piece in a gallery in LA, and that's where the garden was going to originally be shown, was in Rosamund Felsen's gallery. And when Paul Schimmel came to the studio, I said, well, he asked me what I was doing. I said, well, this is a piece I'm working on. It was a garden. He said, well, I'd like it for my show. And he gave me like a small budget of a few $1,000s. And essentially I rented everything. It's how I did it. I made the figures as cheap as I could and rented everything else. Just went to a Hollywood rental and just rented all the stuff I needed. And the piece was essentially rented for 2 months. But then when that stopped, when that piece was going to go to MoCA, then it was kind of like, well, what am I going to do for this show? And I was really interested in sets and Hollywood sets, and could I wanted to use a set, an existing set, and Rosamund helped me find this set, and it was a set from Family Affair, as I remember, something like that. And I get the set, and it's a set that was a fast food restaurant during the show, and it was called Bossy Burger. And so the name came from the set that was used in a television show. And I become a kind of chef, and I just went to find a mask, and it was Alfred E. Newman. I find this mask of Alfred E. Newman. So I'm the chef, and I shoot it. the whole film, we set the setup in the gallery, and I rented I got a video truck from a cable station so we could run all the cameras and park the truck in back of the gallery, ran the cables and the cameras into the gallery, and shot the video in one night. I kind of had some ideas of what I would do, but wasn't really sure. And I'd set the setup. Normally sets are set up in a U shape, and I had set it up in as an enclosed space with a front door, and so the filming it, like someone was from above and someone's at the door. We had to position the camera so they could see it, and shot it in one night and edited the next day, and showed it in the gallery. So it was all kind of done in the gallery, done in the space. And I was thinking that way more, like I would do a show and then I would do it right in the space that I was showing. And yeah, and that was Bossy Burger. So it was pretty much, there wasn't really a script. I knew I would go from room to room. I'd gotten whatever food I thought I needed, or this sort of abject material, right? Ketchup and all that, but pretty much just spontaneous,
And I think it's really one of the first of your characters who are completely sort of detached from the world. They're sort of lost in their own space, and their behavior, which is bizarre enough, seems even more heightened by the fact that they're completely oblivious to any possible repercussions or any possible bad side. They just keep doing what they're doing as if it's a kind of an anarchy or entropy just being unleashed within this social space.
Yeah, but I sort of view humanity as that. I mean, we're locked on a planet and trapped, right? And we've constructed this reality without even knowing we're alive. And we go to, we're all self-absorbed. And once that reality is constructed, it's hard to see your way out of it, right? You can't see that we exist and that we're on a planet, right? It's hard to see that because we're so caught up. And in a way, the set is set up as a trap. He can't leave. Like, he never goes outside of it. So he's a kind of existential, I don't know, universal character.
Well, yeah, he can't get out, but it's almost as if he wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the space. It's like the space creates him.
Yeah, well, that's where we're at, right?
Exactly. Well, I want to move on a little bit because I mentioned that I was going to talk about how these threads carry through. And as we were looking at the garden and I was going through your more recent work, I realized that, White Snow, which you did at the Park Avenue Armory in 2013, kind of carries on this idea of, Disney animatronics and nature, only in this case, it's an actor and not an animatronic.
Yeah. And, White Snow, it's it's 2000. I'd started thinking about Snow White and making a piece around, it was like at one point I realized I was making these pieces, and then I all of a sudden went, wow, the Snow White, I'd never, why didn't it dawn on me before, the subject of Snow White? It was so loaded, and I started working on it, and it had some interruptions. Like I started on it, and then in the middle of working on it, the thing of making a piece about Rebel and Natalie Wood and Nick Ray and all that came up, and I almost didn't do that. It it came out from James Franco at that time was very part of the art world, and I kind of wanted to make a movie of it, and I got involved, and I didn't want to do it because of the similarity of Natalie Wood and the direction I was going, because Natalie Wood and Nick Ray and, you know, the Chateau Marmont and the little house on the property of Chateau number, you know, the bungalow number 2, and how similar that could be in relationship to the dwarf house. And I had been drawing the dwarf house, and I had a staircase in it going into a basement, a kind of underground. And so I was working on something in relation to the Snow White that had real connections to Rebel. And I almost didn't do it. And then I thought, well, let's see where it goes, right? And I in this film we make, I play the part of Nick Ray, and was there a so-called the rumors of the relationship of Nick Ray and Sal Mineo and Natalie Wood? Did they really happen at the chateau when when both of those actors were so young? And what was Nick Ray? And I mean, that was the thing that Franco was sort of interested in. But so there's a delay. So really, White Snow starts in probably 2010, and I don't get to it till 2013. And when I go to do it, I decide I'm going to build this big garden, this big forest as a set. Before the house, the dwarf house would be my house that I grew up in. And I would be Walt Disney. And Elise Poppers played White Snow, and we auditioned all these dwarves, and I set the house up to look like my house with the furniture and everything. And in a lot of ways, there was a connection. I mean, in a certain way, my father looked like Walt Disney, same kind of hair combed back, same period of time. My mother resembled Snow White, black hair, real pale skin. There was this crazy parent thing going on. And so, you know, the slide before that, if you go back to the slide before in the forest, maybe you can go back, that one, we shot, before we shot in this artificial forest and with my house, we shot it up in the Sierras, and we shot a film deep into the woods where I play Walt Disney and Elise plays Snow White, or White Snow. I switched the name to White Snow. And crazy, in the forest, we found this tree that said Walt on it. Unbelievable, right? Like, so crazy. Like, we're wandering through deep in the forest, and we look up, and it's Walt. And so that's when that image happened. You know, it seemed like I had to do it. It was too perfect and too crazy and too much of a coincidence. And so the image was made. And then you can go to the next one, I guess, right? And then the thing about in Snow White, the Disney, they have parties. And part of the thing that had been going on in my work was these parties, the whole thing of intoxication and being drunk, you know. And this is a party that the dwarves are having for Walt and White Snow. You know.
And then increasingly, it seems like the party becomes the impetus for making drawings and making paintings. It's almost as if the action spills off of the set and onto the studio and to the canvas that's on the floor. Is that a direct process for you, or did the drawing re-enter the your working process in a different way?
Well, you know, you know, in that period of when I sort of quit this sort of performance in alternative spaces and all that, when that happens in the late 70s, early 80s, which was going on. I mean, a number of artists sort of at that point, the whole art world changes in the 80s, right? You know, the galleries begin again. Mary Boone happens, right? Painting comes back, you know, the discovery of Gerhard Richter and Sigmar Polke and painting Schnabel and David Sally all happens at that period. And this sort of alternative art world and art as life sort of, you know, this painting is dead became no, painting isn't dead. And, but at that point, I also, the performance art world changed. It became more cabaret and you know, alternative spaces began to make stages with lights and painted black walls and seating, and you know, everything would happen that would start at 7 o'clock at night or something. And I don't know why that one's up, but you know, like, anyway, you can take that slide down. Don't show that. Yeah, I don't care, whatever. So what happens is I during that 80s, I started painting and drawing again. It was like, I'm not going to go make a performance in a space. And I start drawing. And when I start drawing, it had happened before, but this idea of the drawing being flat on the ground, or the painting being flat on the ground, and I'd done that before. And in the 60s, all the paintings I made were flat on the ground. I never painted with them up on the wall or on an easel. And that, in a way, was an arena, right? Like a performance space. And so drawing had that to me. It was a thing about, and drawing on in a big, like where I could be on top of the drawing, right? And so I started drawing again, and in a way, the drawings, and it'd been in the 60s where it was a type of performance going on, you know, the whole thing of talking while I draw or whatever had been going on since the 60s. So, you know, it moves into the 80s, and you know, like when you say, well, a kind of party, I think the something that the party has been as an outward image in a lot of pieces, but I don't know whether the party is only, it's just about the entering of another, like another world. You know, I think that in performance or theater or you know, film, this thing of becoming entering the language of art.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think there's this thing of art and life as art and Capro and the importance of that, and how it's been pushed really to the side right now by the art commodity, right? And I remember, like, I was friends with Capro, and there was a kind of, you know, I think there was a respect for what I was doing, and of course I had huge respect for what he was and how he had changed art and all that. But I think for me, there was an interest in the subject of art and life, and making a work in life, and life affecting you as an artist. But there was something where I sort of entered an arena. That art existed in a certain way for me in an arena, right? And the subject of the pedestal, the subject of the arena, the drawing, the room, this room here with the party inside. It's where you go to make the language, where you go to make the art language. So party, yes, but party is, the party is about letting, to a degree, letting freeing the voice, freeing the brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, alcohol, drugs, the arena of art. It's like letting it go, and in a kind of belief in that, right? And a trust in that. And of course, you're going to cross lines, you know, and you know, like, yeah, you cross into the taboo in a certain way, because, or the incorrect. You're letting yourself go, and who the hell knows what's inside, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's maybe natural to now go to the next slide, because, you know, I think the new work, the most recent work, kind of steps into not the forbidden or the wrong, but you know, sort of an area where now you've got Ava and Adolf, not necessarily on this slide, but there's, you know, you're working with a new prototype, and they're not, you know, Disney characters anymore. They're real figures from history, but they've been, their meaning has been distorted. Their roles are twisted in a very particular way, both in the script that you created, but also in the paintings themselves. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Well, you know, I had made pieces back in, I don't know, what it was, the late 90s or something. I made a piece called A Straight Line from Adolf Hitler's Berlin to Walt Disney's Anaheim. And I remember I said that. And then I didn't know what the piece would be. I just said it. And then I ended up collecting images from Berlin through Germany to California. And it was literally like a line. So the piece came from saying that, and then the piece happened. And I collected, like, I don't know, 1,000 images, like the Eiffel Tower in Las Vegas, the Eiffel Tower with the Nazis going under it, the Bavaria chalets, Hitler's house, its connection to houses in California, you know, the Eiffel Tower in Vegas, the Eiffel Tower in LA, you know, like Walt Disney with children and dogs and little trains, and Hitler with dogs and little kids. And so there's been this, and then my whole thing of family tyranny was about Bavaria. So there's been this interest in the psychology of fascism, or the psychology of paranoia, and the blame of the other, and the manipulation, and how manipulation, maybe it came from, you know, in the 60s of reading, you know, Wilhelm Reich and Adorno and Marcuse and Norman O'Brien and all this, and the politics of the 60s and fascism then, and then it going right up until we hit, you know, I make a piece, you know, before this piece was a piece, and I'd wanted to make a Western for a long time, but I made a piece called CSSSC, Coach, Stage, Coach. And then Coach and SS were in the middle. And that piece is a stagecoach with these characters in it, which is Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan looks like JP Morgan, right? He doesn't look like Ronald Reagan, and he's not called Reagan, is Ray Gun. And Ray Gunn is a reference to Hannah Wilke and Klaus Oldenburg in the art world. And then in the coach is Nancy Ray Gunn. And then Jesus Christ is in the coach and Mary Magdalene are in the coach, but you're not sure whether they're really Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. You don't know whether these two characters are making those names up as they go. And then also is Eve and Adam, the innocent. And the characters in the coach, in a sense, are the libertines. And the four, Ronald, Nancy, the Jesus Christ, they're the in a way, the fascist. And they go after the innocent, right? And we shoot this film. And then at one point during the shooting of this film, we shoot it for like 60 days up in the lower Sierras. And then at one point, the characters switched and Ronald Reagan became Donald Duck or Donald Trump. And you know, Daisy Duck becomes Melania, and we reshoot it again. We shoot the whole film again for another 45 days, but the characters are different. And during this entire period of time of the last few years, the subject, not just in America, but the subject of fascism has just been there, right? Like
absolutely.
It's just, and I then had ended up making a piece with Lilith, who is in these images, and Lilith and Damon, my son, we started working on this piece called a remake of the film, The Night Porter. And if you go back to the other slide, this one, in this, we decide to and it's a lot about, we were given an opportunity. There was money in Austria to remake this movie, and it was an idea we had, but were we gonna act on it? And then all of a sudden there was an interest, and we decided to make it. Then the money's pulled and we can't go back. So we shoot the film, we shoot it in LA. And at that time, it became about, I play the character Max from the movie. And Max is a Hollywood producer, and crazy, the Weinstein thing happened, right? And the character, the script I wrote, which was really based on Cosby in a way, but what was going on, I play a producer that it makes films, but he's really not interested in making the films. He's really about manipulation. So, and he's fascinated with fascism. And I play an asshole, right? I'm the asshole. And Lilith Stengenberg, who was an actress that I'd done things with in Germany, and we really connected, I think, on a mental, you know, like what we were, you know, the subject of Artaud or Bataille or Deleuze, or, you know, the subject of what is going on in the world, right? And so we make this piece and we shoot for, you know, 30, 40 days. And at one point we did these things called drawing sessions where we would draw on a platform, and the platform is pushed into the set we built. The set's a huge set called The Maze, but we just pushed the set in. This is the set. This is the ending of The Night Porter. It's not called The Night Porter, it's called Night Vater or Night Father. And it's a much darker than The Night Porter, I think. And we've never edited it. It's edited parts of it, but it's, you know, 100 terabytes and 300,000 still photographs. At the end of this, the end of it is they kill each other often throughout the film. And I play this, am I the father or am I Max? Or who am I in this? You can't, it just switches constantly. And you know, we're dressed in some way the same as The Night Porter is, this 1974 film that was with Charlotte Rampling and Bogart. but the ending of it is she puts the gun up his ass and shoots him and then commits suicide. So although they kill themselves over and over again and come back to life, in the end, they kill both of them die. And that's the end shot of the film. And when we made that, at one point I became really, the subject of mafia came up, and and part of it was how I looked. I just saw myself as like this aging mafia character that I was being, a kind of godfather. And then I started thinking of global politics as just organized crime, that all we were talking about is the rise of organized crime to global politics. And the subject, when we finished this, we were gonna commit suicide in the woods. And we did it in this set, and both of us, Lilith and I both sort of came to this point of, wow, do we take on Adolf and Eva? And Adolf and Eva, A and E is Adam and Eve, these polarities of the cliche of good and evil, but really something there, right? Like, do we take on Adolf? And I remember at the time thinking, that's a subject you can't touch, right? And of course, you know, what's its name? You know, Bozo Rabbit, whatever that movie was, came out at the same, what was the movie? Roger Rabbit? I don't even remember the name of the movie.
I remember Bojo Rabbit.
You know, the kid,
Yeah.
the kid who has the fantasy of that Hitler is talking to him or something. And it was so crazy because that happened every time I did a project. When I made White Snow, 3 Snow Whites happened. It was just, when we made Pirates of the Caribbean, Caribbean Pirates happens. It was just these weird connections that pop up. But, you know, taking on Hitler, and of course the Hitler characters were both buffoons, right? And we're drunk constantly. You were drunk buffoons in these things. And, you know, and then the subject of Hitler, like it's not about, with all of these characters, like I'm not really Walt Disney.
Right.
You know, like I'm not trying to really get it down right. Like I'm pretty good at moments where I look like Walt Disney. And same with Trump. I kind of had it, but we're amalgamations of some sort of a number of kinds of characters. And, you know, with the Hitler character, it's like, I'm not German. So I'm not a German Adolf Hitler. I'm some sort of American, right? It's like an American Hitler. And then he's, you know, even back with Painter, was I de Kooning or was I trying to be de Kooning? And in this, the character is kind of like a buffoon American who's imitating Hitler, right? And is Lilith trying to be Eva Braun? No, she's like something else. She's like, you know, is she an actress? What is she? And on the other side to that, we've both spent a couple of years reading about fascism. Like we've really, like, what the hell is it, right? And trying to understand how manipulation and paranoia happens in a mass way, right? Like in a way, we're talking about mass paranoia and a kind of forming of a psychosis and on a mass level. And, you know, so, yeah. And the other image, that's Night Porter. The next one, you go to the next one. And in there, yeah, this is a drawing session of of where we're some sort of form of Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler, but it's something else. We're on that table. It's a lot about making the drawing. And you know, like Lilith is free to do whatever she wants, and I draw, and she's free to draw or sit on me or whatever. And these sessions would go on for days, you know. I mean, I think they're like, you know, this is, and the table in the middle, that's the table we drew on. And then the second table up is the table that was sitting in the back of that table where a lot of the crap was on. And these were the chairs that were up on the table. And Lilith sat on this table, on this pink chair. It's called the Eva throne. On the table is speakers and players, and we recorded every drawing session. I don't know how many hours there are, a huge amount. And there are 8 speakers playing 8 channels of audio from 8 different drawings. But in this case, we made like 15 drawings, and then I decided to put the platform in there, you know. And we were going to shoot A&E, you know, in August of last year, and then COVID happened and that ended it. And so we're just waiting, you know. But
and so these depictions of Adolf and the voice of Adolf and Eva, these kinds of renderings of language and cartoon faces, almost like a Murakami Hitler, these are coming from these sessions, right? Where you're sort of literally acting out on the canvas these characters and their roles. Is that the right way to characterize it?
Yeah, but like I said, that it's, you know, in a certain way, the image of Hitler becomes like emoji, right? And you know, a kind of cartoonish character. But in the drawings, there are references all through the drawings of Adolf and Adam and Eva and Eve. But as we're doing them, it really is a kind of a mixture of stuff. I mean, I don't even, you know, like we were talking the other day, it's kind of like you're not really being, you're not like trying to get to an accurate representation of Adolf, and neither is the drawing, right? It's more like some kind of caricature, but also being something else, right? And then a lot about the subject of male and female. Like that was a huge part of The Night Porter. It's been kind of part of a number of pieces, even White Snow would back then, you know, it came up like the subject of the male and female, and that being primal, right? Like in both films, there are points where in the script of Adolf and Eva, they change genders, right? Like Adolf wants to be the woman and Eva wants to be the man. I mean, these gender changes happen in it, but this thing of the male and the female as primal, and primal to, you know, the human continuation, the baby, and also primal in our thinking, you know, in some way. But these pieces become a lot about this relationship of the male and female, and then a lot about switching ages and gender. Like I become a baby, she becomes a little girl, she becomes the mother, I become the father, I become the artist. She becomes the actress. You know, like she becomes Ava. She becomes Eve. I become Adolf. I become Adam. You know, it's switching. Animal. The whole thing of animal. I become the wolf. Adolf was called the wolf. She becomes the rabbit. I become the rabbit. She becomes the wolf. You know, I become a human. She becomes a rabbit.
Well, and this fluidity of
wolf, she
characters,
becomes human. Huh?
yeah, this fluidity of characters does seem to be a fairly recent development where characters can keep metamorphizing to other like the wolf becomes the rabbit, becomes the old man, becomes the baby.
It come up in pieces before. That switching had come up, this switching of age, gender, species had come up before. And the drawings are very level, layered, right? And like on top of each other, literally like I'm drawing on top of drawings, right? If you see one of these drawings in the beginning, there's a whole drawing there. Or in the paintings, there's a whole painting and then it just changes to another painting. And the drawing on top of the drawing, or the writing on top of the writing, and we're both on top of it, on top of the drawing, right?
Yeah. So let's look at a couple more images from the show, including a couple of the paintings here.
And these paintings are all done outside in the woods and on the ground, like the paintings. And then of course, there's dirt all over them, and we glued the dirt on. Like when you got through, there's dirt all over them and sticks. And the thing was, well, do we brush it off? And then this thing of gluing it on. Same with the drawings. And that was crazy because once we decided to glue everything on the drawing, the second part of it began. And gluing everything onto the drawings, some of those drawings took over a week, 2 people gluing for a week. And there are 17 of these drawings and 4 or 5 paintings. So the subject of attachment and attaching to the surface. So it started another whole performance in a way that was all like little pieces of stuff. These are all painted inside and there's less on them, but the cat tower was on the painting. The painting was painted flat on the ground. And at one point I put the cat tower because it was in the studio. And then Lilith climbed up on the cat tower and pretended to be a cat, right? And then when we finished the painting, I thought, well, I guess I have to attach the cat tower. And of course, attaching a cat tower was really difficult because it wants to fall down, collapse. It can't hold it. So we had to build an entire structure inside the cat tower to keep it from falling. Right. I guess I could have let it fall. I don't know.
On a viewer.
I could have done that, I guess. Maybe that would have been better. I don't know. But so these pieces come from these actions, and the actions are layered. And that's one of the reasons I made multiple audio recordings. It showed it as multiple. Like you're hearing, when you go in the room, you hear 8 channels, and it's 8 different drawings going on at the same time. So it's kind of mixing it together. And I'm kind of in the process of editing the videos, right? And the videos are all like a few hours long and stuff like that. And there are like 17 of them or something. And I kind of want to show them all in one room, right? And all mixed together, right? So these drawing sessions, and then the one before was the Nightwater drawing sessions. We've done Nightwater and 2 or 3 A&Es, and the image, if you go back to the image of Hitler and Eva lying on the ground, keep going. We're getting this one. This one here is a virtual reality. We're making a virtual reality. We made 24 virtual realities, all about 10, 15 minutes. And these are motion capturing straps on us. So we motion capture and scanned ourselves. And and it's really two drunk buffoons in the California desert. And she refers to herself as the German and I'm an American. And it's, yeah.
Well, great, Paul, this has been wonderful. I think it'd be, maybe this is a good time as any to take some questions from people that have been tuning in. And I know we've got some questions already logged in.
Yes. As well, let's shift over to the Q&A. I just want to firstly say I thank you both so much. I feel like I have such a deeper appreciation of Paul's work now. But let's go right over to it. So the first question is Judith Brown. Judith, I'm going to send you a little note for you to turn on your mic. Can you? There you are. Judith, can you hear us?
Yeah, yes. Okay, I came on.
Great.
Oh, so you want me to ask the question?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. So my question is, I really don't know who Lilith is. And I was curious whether she's credited as part of the show that's up now, because she seems to be such a major player in creating the work.
Yeah, she is. You know, the pieces, and again, a typical struggle of getting the institutions to understand how these pieces are done, and you know, wanting to put the emphasis on the drawing as an object and not realizing it's done a real particular way, and that, you know, in a way, I think, you know, Lilith wasn't really interested in drawing, I think, making the drawing. She was interested in the performance of everything. And so when we went to do the show, I said, look, you have to put her name there. It's like, understand, you can't just see it as a drawing made by Paul. You have to understand how it's done, and that how critical it is. Like the drawings wouldn't be what they are without us doing what we did. And how, you know, like in a lot of ways, I said, you know, they are what they are because I believe in them and Lilith believes in them. And it's critical to me who she is, and what she does, you know. And it's, you know, yes, I write the scripts to a degree, but she writes every day to me about what she thinks. And it's, you know, and of course, it's easier for people to understand in the film and theater world, but the art world has an aversion to collaboration. And so you have to always punch that one, right? It's the terrible one with my son and I working together, like how it'll just go right to me. And, but literally, like, yeah. I mean, it's the way it's credited. It says Paul McCarthy drawing and painting sessions with Lilith Stangenberg, how it's written. And I think that's pretty correct, right? It is to a degree that. It's another whole thing when you get to these film pieces and, you know, and the whole subject of, you know, Lilith is, you know, in the performances, she's free to do what she wants. You know, it's like, yeah, we sit and write scripts, or I write a script, but it's completely in her ballpark to do as she wants and be who she is. And I trust it completely. Like if she says no, it's no, because I trust her opinion. And that can be different than other people, male or female. but I have huge trust for her opinion. And we kind of bonded over interests, right? Like, so it's a collaboration, but it's where Mike and I was like two artists, right? And you just kind of went collaboration like that. And in this case, it becomes slightly different, but it's like, how do we think about it? And how does it come out in the different worlds that we both occupy? Like, I'm very interested, like one of the things that we're working on now is to do a theater piece in Germany. And there, like, I'm writing it and she works on it, but how will that be credited? And I think it's credited as Paul McCarthy and Lilith Stangerberg, because in this way I come to theater because of her. She's involved in theater, and so yeah,
Amazing. Thank you, Paul. I'm next going to hand the mic over to the Rail's own Catherine. Catherine, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Nick. And thank you, Paul, for your generosity today, and Dan for leading this conversation. My question is, how do you relate to humor when making your work? Is it totally essential that there always be that element of humor? And then does it guide your decision making? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, for me, often in these things, either with Mike or Damon or Lilith, there's a lot about jokes and humor, and a lot of the ideas come out of that. Like, we make a joke, like you're sitting eating and you make a joke, and then the joke becomes the piece. I mean, in some ways, even the subject of Night Porter was kind of a joke. Like, we were shooting a film in Berlin with Lilith, and at one point I just said, looks like Night Porter, right? Like, the scene looks like Night Porter. And we kind of laughed because of what we were doing, and then the subject of Night Porter. And then it was like, Lilith said, oh, I'll sing the song. And then the subject came up, oh, we should redo it, right? And it was kind of like, whoa, really? Like, it kind of almost existing as a joke. And with the joke, and the joke flipping something, like you flip what it is, and the relationship of the joke or the humor to flipping reality, flipping normality. And so that is part of it. And then there's another thing about humor, and I kind of think there's some quote about humor is the organic of the mechanical. I can't something, and then the Bataille and the philosophy of humor and the philosophy of laughter, and this kind of, like, all of this feeds into some of that. And then, I like humor, and I think also this thing of making making these contradictions, where on one hand, you're watching something that just seems wrong, like could be horrific, and yet the way it's framed and what creates, you start laughing, and you're caught in this thing of two reactions going on at the same time in yourself. And that as a powerful thing, and a something that says something to you, says something to internally to yourself, like, a question happens in there. And so, yeah, you know, it's, you know, like, I mean, I think in Nightbotter, it's dark. That thing's dark. And is it funny? You know? Yeah, there are parts that are really crazy, right? You know, at that point, I mean, there was a scene where Lilith wanted to read, it was all about Marlon Brando and Last Tango in Paris and the butter and that whole thing. And we needed to make a payback to Marlon Brando and Bertolucci. And so there's this piece of butter. And I think it's humorous at one point and then really dark at another, you know. In the end, Max gets his dick cut off, you know.
Using that as the transition.
Somehow it goes from this to this, right? And you're caught, you know. And did we really plan that? Did we plan on that being the effect? And the answer is like sometimes no. It just went that way, you know.
We usually end the Q&A with a question from Fong, but we're going to flip normality today, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Fong now.
Thank you, Paul. This is amazingly exciting to hear you speak this great length. Thank you also, Dan, for uniting with Paul, because that show at the New Museum that you did, and I remember Tony Vidler wrote an amazing essay, and so did Amelia Jones, you know?
That's right.
And we did the review in the Rail, and was our first art editor, Daniel Baer, and it was called Paul McCarthyism. That was 2001. It was so intense. But by the way, the guy who made that movie that you referring to, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Paul, was Robert McCasis, remember? McCasis. Yeah, same guy who did Back to the Future, the trilogy, and Forrest Gump.
Oh, he's thinking of Jojo Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit.
Oh my God, that's different reference altogether. So listen, my question is very simple, Paul. You went to San Francisco Art Institute as a painter, as an undergrad. And then when you moved to University of Southern California, you essentially gave up painting and began making conceptual work, video, film, sculpture, and installation, and whatnot. And I remember seeing that great piece, May 171, the slide projection work, I think a photographic record of what was happening outside of your window in 25 takes. That was the show that Connie Llewellyn and Karen Moss did. It's called State of Mind, New California Art, I think. I saw it at the Brown Museum in, I think it's 2013, I think.
It was done at the Orange County Museum in California.
Yeah, and my feeling is this. Don't you always feel, this is for you too, Dan, I think the painterly quality to Paul's work have always sustained and somehow very evident in everything he's done ever since. I mean, is that a fair question, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One was, you know, I was at the University of Utah and then San Francisco Art Institute. In both cases, I was in the painting department. Right. And I was involved in painting and making paintings. But during that whole time, by 66, I know of happenings and performance. It was not called performance and making films. So this thing of film and paintings going on at the same time, beginning in the 60s. So yeah, I end up at the Art Institute in the painting department because that's where I was, but I was still really interested in film, and so it continues. And then the interesting thing about that May piece, the photograph piece, is that when I moved to LA, there was I was interested in, I was always making photographs, but there was a thing about being lost in LA and not knowing where you were, and like this spread, right?
Yeah.
And that set of photos, there was a number of different photographs like that one. One was a photograph every mile down Sunset. Another one was a photograph every so many minutes in an airplane from Salt Lake City to LA. So there were these things that had to do with photographing in time and space and stuff like that. And that set of photographs is just me on the corner, and I just take a photograph every so many seconds, right, of looking in the same direction. And it, you know, it's about that period there was a whole thing about the phenomena of space and time and being, there were 3 or 4 things. One was the phenomena of space and the phenomena of time. The other one was the phenomena of reflection and memory and the fear of losing memory and the loss of memory, like not being able to know whether a mannequin is real or not, like a baby's memory or a baby's thought, like, is that a human or not a human? So these pieces were going on at the same time, right? And what was that last part of the question? I was kind of thinking about.
The question was that, you know, the painterly.
Oh, painting. Oh, yeah. Or the subject of painting. And then when I started making, you know, the whole thing of film and photograph, in LA, performance was often thought in California, like Tom Marioni and Howard Freed and Chris Burden and all these, and Barbara Smith and Eleanor Anton, the subject of performance and sculpture. And performance as sculpture, like equating it.
Yeah.
And this thing of the body as sculpture, or the 3-dimensionality and the physicality of the environment and the body as sculpture. And I was always, in interviews and that back at that period of time, I said that there was a relationship for me to painting. And not just because of this goo abject paint that is part of painting. Paint is a goo, it's shit, it's whatever, right? It's a goo factor. And not just for that, but somehow I saw the images like painting.
Yeah.
And the whole thing of filming and photographing was intuitively, I guess, or something critical. Like, I remember once I was sitting on a panel with Chris Burden, and Chris said, I only need 1 photograph. And I said, I need 1,000. And it's kind of something about that, right? That I was interested in the image in the rectangle, even though I'm constantly trying to fight the image in the rectangle. There was something about, and in painting and color, and so painting, you know, I make the association to painting and to sculpture. I mean, sculpture became more and more of a thing for me in the 80s. Like, I went further into it. Like, now I'm known as a sculptor and not as a painter. Like, maybe it'll change, but you know, they'll say, oh, it's a sculptor who makes performances, right? But it's because of what happened in the last 20 years. I kind of went to sculpture, you know, but painting is critical, you know. And I think, and a lot of the references to Night Porter and the exchange of images that, you know, have gone back and forth between me and Lilith are a lot about painting and the history of painting. And same with White Snow and Elise. It was a lot about, we collected a lot of imagery, and a lot of it had to do with painting.
Yeah, it's hard to predict what you do next, Paul. That's the power of your work. What do you feel any kind of affinity? Because every time I think of your work, I see your work, experience it. There's this unrelenting and unedited energy of anarchy that somehow remind me so much of Litharoth, you know? And I wonder whether you have met him or crossed paths somehow in the past.
You know, the Diderot, you know, when I moved to LA in 1970, Diderot had his show at and it was the cheese show where he, the cheese suitcases, which, you know, it's kind of unclear as to whether it was closed down or not. But, and I remember when Cal Arts opened, and I stole a Diderot book in 1970 that was at Cal Arts, and now I've lost it. But so Diderot, you know, I mean, the subject of Diderot and Joseph Beuys and Fluxus and Kudo and, you know, Kusama and all this, the early stuff of Kusama, all this kind of stuff, you know, Eva Haas, Augusto, and Naumann. But, you know, all of that in that early 70s post-minimalism, and then these artists from the Fluxus period and this rotting material and all that. You know, I mean, I in a lot of ways, I was using materials in the 60s that were rotting materials without really knowing of those artists. It was just, I couldn't afford paint, so why not use motor oil, right? Or why not use grease? Or why not use ketchup, right? Like, and you know, so yeah, it's kind of strange you just mentioned it, that the thing back there, that's a Diderot.
Oh, cool. That's excellent. Oh, yeah.
It's a
the
print.
Gallery, the print, the gallery, that was with Eugenia Butler, Paul.
Yeah, Eugenia Butler Gallery, yeah.
That's it. Yeah, thank you. This is terrific. I give it back to Nick. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phong and Paul. Next, I'm going to hand the mic over to Tootsie Warhol. Tootsie, you should be able to turn on your mic.
I thank you to the Brooklyn Rail and to Dan and Paul for having this great conversation. I just wanted to ask you, Paul, if you've ever been sued by the Walt Disney Company, and how you managed to walk the line between artistic freedom and, you know, intellectual property rights.
Well, no, I haven't been sued by Disney. It's scary, yes, right. I mean, I think in, you know, there's a thing about caricature and the freedom of the artist to, you know, to critique, right? And I think I don't tread on their money, and it's not, it just hasn't, there's been no, I haven't made a piece that treads on their money, so I'm not affecting their money. And, you know, I think the danger could be that they would want to sue me just to ruin me, not that I would lose, I think. But, you know, I think at this point, you know, there has to be the freedom to look at these things that are so powerful, right? Disney's powerful in its effect. And, you know, the government leaders, of course, are powerful, and how they affect us. And we have to be able to tried to digest what it is. Like, what's going on here with this kind of influence? And it's really about freedom of the artist. And yeah, I mean, one of the first things that a fascist want to do is to shut down the press and to shut down the artist, right? It's, when the colonialism in America, what were the first things they killed off? It was the clowns. The sacred clowns were killed off before the shamans, So, it's that voice. So it's critical. And no, I've been sued, but never by that, And knock on wood.
Knocking on wood. Thank you, Tootsie. Thank you, Paul. Our final question is going to come from Brad. Brad, you should be able to turn on your mic now.
Hey, is this thing on?
We can hear you.
Great. Hi, thanks everybody. Thanks, Paul. I was curious about working with Dame, and just to me, the idea for one of having a good relationship with your child, that alone is phenomenal. So I'm just curious what it's like to make work with your son. It seems like you guys have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And what's that like within like a father-son relationship? It seems really intriguing to me.
Damon and my daughter, both of them, like there was a period where, they grew up around art, like it was the friends, it's what happens, what was going on in the house with Karen and I, it's what we did and it's what we thought about. And I guess social, cultural issues and all that. But I think both my son Damon and my daughter Mara, they tended to move away from art and right around out of high school, and they both sort of talked about going in. Mara was going to go into biology, Damon was going to become a doctor, and it was all this stuff. And then at one point, Damon decides he's going to be a poet. And I thought, whoa, that's a crazy one. And Mara all of a sudden goes from biology to literature, and it's like the brains changed, right around as young adults, and then both of them ended up in art schools. Damon went to film school and Mara went to art history. So it was like a turnaround at some point, unexpected to Karen and I. And then Damon just goes to film school and comes out of film school and says to me, why don't we remake the Pirates of the Caribbean as an idea? It's his idea. And that just started it. And Mara opened a gallery at some point and goes to New York, comes back and opens the gallery. So it was, in both cases, it was a evolving situation towards that. And with Damon, I mean, at this point, we are always working every day together. And for the most part, Damon is dealing with film and editing. I mean, one of the real crazy things is I just keep moving to the next project, and the material just keeps building up. And I don't know how many terabytes of video exist in storage now, 200, I don't know. It's on and on and on. And will we ever edit it at all? I don't know, but that's what Damon's dealing with, right? It's the filming and the editing, we have a camera meeting after this. So it's, and the ideas and everything are, and a lot of it does come from like discussions, and he'll call me up and say, hey, did you see this? So it's I mean, it's not always the easiest thing, because you're trying to work something out, and problems are always occurring, money problems and people problems. And, right now we're emptying buildings and, you know, it's downsizing for the purpose of making more films, you know, and we don't need the space to make films. And so we have to deal with just actual, you know, they're not day-to-day problems. They're just like, how do we continue? You know, I mean, we spend more than we make, that's for sure. And so it's like we deal with that problem, and those are tough problems that, you know, do we have conflicts? Yeah, I think we do. You know, like, how the hell are we going to deal with this now? You know, like, now we got a big problem. How do we deal with this? So yeah, it's a really, you know, it just happened. You know, like, it didn't see it coming, and it's existed now for 20 years. You know, the working with Damon. You know.
Thank you, Paul. I don't want to cause a problem and make you late to that appointment. So
no, don't worry.
That'll wrap up our Q&A. I want to thank everyone for sharing their questions, and apologies to those we couldn't get to. But again, thank you all. Here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunch program with a poem. I'm thrilled to welcome today our poet laureate, Cristine Brache, to the stage. Cristine is an artist, filmmaker, and poet. She received her MFA in Fine Art Media from the Slade School of Art in London. She often takes her personal and family history as a starting point to explore cultural erasure, shared histories in drama, womanhood, and the inevitable power dynamics that accompany these themes. Brochet predominantly works in installation, sculpture, text, and film. We'll post a little more information on Cristine in the chat, but Cristine, the mic is yours.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm a huge fan of Paul's work, so it was great to hear y'all speak. I tried to look through and find some poems that I guess speak to the show that's up. I guess tangentially to speaks to maybe some fascism or whatever, but you'll see and you'll let me know maybe. Okay, so last night I felt afraid to die. Remember to turn off the lights wherever you don't want to see. Remember, I am a feather in love and this world is a thief. How sick must it make us? Mop me up and send me the bill. In another life, I find my fantasy where the void respects me forever. What hope is there if feathers can no longer fall to the ground with grace? Good night, sweet thing. We dreamt of flowers and listening to women. Still, every time we go to bed, we go to war. Sleep drowns in the arms of a fallen angel. Maybe she's been nauseous since January, like me. I forget. Tomorrow, we can wake up without pain. And if I could sing you to sleep, I would. Self-reflection figure. I fold myself in search of my own thoughts and feelings, each a mirage, like an army, all lined up in a row. Soldiers, please stay still as I track my apparition. Wait for me. My command, a fleeting hunger in disguise, lingers stale nowhere. I organize my delusions and wonder if I'm haunting myself. I move through life like symbols in a painting, but what do I signify? God is the space between you and me. Don't obsess over my deathless, rosy cheeks when you can't see them, your biggest fear. They are 100% guaranteed, tried and true, even when existence is a dark and godless hole. People dream about you, though I don't know how often. More mysterious unknowns. Be still. An owl's flight is silent sometimes, like I love you in broad daylight and I love you behind your back. Have trust, have faith, not in God, but in love with me. Society's poem. I wish I could know what it felt like to truly be carefree. The trouble is, there are so many consequences. The nightmare is also that you made me and all my thoughts are yours. And I feel so for being anything at all, whatever I want, without you in my spine. But there are many consequences. Yes, there are many consequences. Lazy Captive Saturday. Are you half empty or half full, like 10 out of 10? How could you let the audience believe in anything except sorry, sorry gods? Wait, was I on a sucker list? Or are you losing deep sleep on Mariana's Trench? Extinction level event. Ask your parents. Is God real? I painted a skull on my face using Pat McGrath's Sublime Skin Highlighting Trio. It was a divine coincidence. My living quarters and existence were that of a poverty-stricken gorilla caged at a zoo. The same beggary hold my teeth at night. A meteorite could hit me. I'd drink tea and my grin would turn to glass. Then finally I'd shatter across the globe. Why run from disappointment when you can throw yourself to the tsunami? Die in my arms. If I were to lean in close and whisper in his ear, I'd say, you forget, you don't have to lie anymore because you're an adult. That's it.
Snaps and claps. Thank you so much, Cristine. That was a beautiful way to end our event today. I want to thank you, Cristine. I want to thank you, Paul and Dan. Thank you to everyone over at Hauser and Wirth. Thank you to Dylan for your help throughout this process. I would like to also share the Rail is celebrating its 20th anniversary as a nonprofit organization. So if you enjoyed our event today, please consider making a donation to keep the Rail and our special projects free, relevant, and independent. There will be some links and info in the chat. We are here every day at 1 p.m. So please join us on Monday for a conversation between artist Stan Douglas and Rail editor-at-large Jason Rosenfeld. We will conclude with a poetry reading from San D. Henry Smith. You all now can turn on your mics to say hello, goodbye, and bon weekend. So thank you again, Paul. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
That was great.
Thank you, Cristine. Thanks, Philip, for the connection.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining, everyone.